This podcast is rated E for everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Nifty Ninty. I, as always, am your host, Matt Tuna Turner, and this is the podcast where we run down everything Nintendo every single week. Coming at you guys a little bit late again this week, just trying to get caught up on everything after a couple weeks of travel, so I apologize for that. I am back at HQ, and hopefully I will be caught up by the end of today. So, back to the normal schedule, so you don't have to wait any longer. I know that these are kind of coming back to back right now, but like I said, just trying to get caught up. Also working on some other really neat projects that hopefully you guys will enjoy. So you have that to look forward to. But again, I'm sorry for being late. Anyways, this past week was Gamescom, so we'll get into a little bit of coverage of that a little later in the show. As always, why don't we start with this week's new releases? Alright, as it was Gamescom this past week, there weren't a whole lot of scheduled releases on the Ninty and packaged good front. I will be getting to the Gamescom news later, but for now, this past week's scheduled releases were, starting with the Ninty front, Behind the Screen, Earthworms, which is a detective game mixed with some horror and humor. Fern's Gate, Floodlight, a neat precision platformer called Hacky Zack, where you try to keep a ball aloft while collecting, I think it's gold coins, and completing levels. Kiro Blaster, My Farm, Out of the Box, Shio, Sky Gambler, Storm Raiders. Up next, a futuristic racing game that's kind of like F-Zero, only in this one you race old cars with hover conversions on tracks that spew from a panda's mouth. If that sounds like a mouthful, it's because it kind of is, but this game actually looks like a lot of fun and can fill that F-Zero void in the meantime. Next up, Spectrum, and finally on the Nindy front, The Low Road. For package titles, All-Star Fruit Racing, Little Dragon's Cafe, and probably the most interesting one for the past week is the FMV Classic Night Trap, the 25th Anniversary Edition. They have upgraded this game so that the video looks better, and protecting those girls from those pesky vampires has never been easier, and you can take it on the go. It offers a bunch of different control methods. You can use touchscreen or simply do it with one Joy-Con. So, as you can see, there weren't too many scheduled releases, but I think that's because Nintendo was holding back just a thing or two for Gamescom, and like I said, we'll get to that just a little bit later. For now, why don't we run down this week's headlines? This week's leading story, the Sega Ages collection is getting releases that include some modern age updates. So this collection is a bunch of Mega Drive games that are coming to the Switch, and they're going to include some very cool new features. So Sega announced some new features specifically for Phantasy Star, as well as Sonic the Hedgehog. For Phantasy Star, the game will now support auto mapping, which the original one did not have. And as you could probably imagine, it kind of got a little confusing, kind of remember where you are. You used to have your own piece of paper so you could actually draw out your own map so you wouldn't get lost. But the Switch version will automatically chart your progress. And of course, it'll also include a bestiary to fill in. There's also some in-game lists of magic and items and an easy mode. For Sonic the Hedgehog, you will be able to do a spin dash, which, as most of you know, did not come into the franchise until Sonic 2. You'll also be able to do the drop dash, which is from Sonic Mania. Sega also announced that these games will be coming with a Mega Play version, which is a more difficult version that was used in the Japanese arcade. It's kind of like a challenge mode. And speaking of challenge modes, there will be 2 new challenge modes with online leaderboards in which you can attempt to get the fastest possible time on the game's first level or play the Mega Play version with only 1 life. So that makes it really, really difficult. Of course, you can turn off these options if you would like. You don't have to play with them. You can play the original game in their original glory, or you can add these new options. I think for Sonic, I may turn off the new options because I think that game was designed to not have the spin dash or the drop dash, and I think including those might make them just a little too simple. Although for Phantasy Star, I think the map thing would be incredibly helpful. Alright, up next, following hot on the heels of their Diablo 3 announcement, Blizzard provides some news on any future titles coming to Switch. They're saying that Overwatch is feasible for the Switch, however StarCraft is incredibly unlikely. Blizzard's senior producer Pete Stillwell spoke with GameSpot about the potential of bringing Overwatch to the Nintendo Switch. He said that it could run on the Nintendo Switch, but that is up to the Overwatch game development team. For now, their focus is on Diablo 3, as you could probably imagine, especially since it launches very soon. He was also asked about StarCraft 2, especially since the original StarCraft came to the N64 about 18 years ago. He said that StarCraft 2 requires a certain amount of keyboard and mouse functionality, so it is probably not likely to ever come to Nintendo's hybrid console. Of course, nothing is without the realm of possibility. Alright, calling all Pokemon fans, those of you who are fans of the original anime and all its 932 episodes are in luck. The Pokemon anime series will be live streamed on Twitch beginning on August 27th and will last into 2019. The Pokemon Marathon would be the longest TV-like marathon on Twitch done to date. It would also be a perfect test for what we as people can endure for Pokemon. Episodes will run for 8 hours from Monday through Thursday, with the weekends reserved for reruns, and the movies, yes, the marathon is going to include movies. The movies will be airing every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So for those of you who missed the original anime and movies, or just want to watch them again, check out Twitch. Of course, the standard timing will be Eastern Standard Time, so those of you around the world will have to plan accordingly. And finally, before we get into the big Gamescom news dump, Shigeru Miyamoto was at the Computer Entertainment Developers Conference, and he did not have such nice things to say about the free-to-play model. Miyamoto said, and I quote, "We're lucky to have such a giant market, so our thinking is, if we can deliver games at a reasonable price to as many people as possible, we will see big profits." I can't say that our fixed cost model has really been a success, he added. I believe that last comment was in relation to the relatively unsuccessful Super Mario Run model. So essentially, Miyamoto-san believes that delivering games at a reasonable price is the best way to go. Personally, I tend to agree with him. I think that a game that is whole and complete is actually worth paying for, as opposed to not having to pay to enter a game and only being faced with paywalls in order to advance in whatever game you happen to be playing. I think that Miyamoto is on the right track. He also mentioned that the subscription-style services were probably the way of the future, and that the success of that would depend on the software developed for those subscription services. Alright, so this past week was Gamescom, which is held annually in wonderful Germany. The Fatherland plays host to this annual convention, and I think it's ideally placed in the year because it's not quite as big as E3, although it is getting bigger, but it allows companies to showcase kind of the fall lineup and early next year type lineup, so in this case would be 2019, which is great. Of course, there's also some big announcements that companies like to hold back for these types of conventions. Hopefully one of these years I will be able to attend Gamescom. If the marketing people at Nintendo or Gamescom are listening, please get in touch. Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, so at least I'd be able to understand what is going on, and I wouldn't need a translator, and you could provide me with demos in German if you'd like, and that would be a-okay with me. On the Nintendo side of things for Gamescom, they of course had Super Smash Bros. Ultimate there. They were showing off some new gameplay with some of the newer characters announced, King K. Rool, Dark Samus, those types of characters. They also had Mario Party on hand, so there was some demo of that I believe, is just a couple mini games, but not the entire game at whole. And I don't think they showed off the neat functionality where you're able to hold, or where you're able to connect, multiple switches together. I don't think they showed that off. I'm pretty sure it was just kept to a couple mini games. Of course, we got some new announcements. Apparently, Diddy Kong is coming to Mario Tennis Aces, so those of you looking to swing around the court with the incredibly agile Diddy Kong on Mario Tennis Aces, you'll be able to do that soon. I think one of the coolest announcements that came out of Gamescom is that Inky Pen is coming to the Nintendo Switch. For those of you that don't know, Inky Pen is a mobile comic platform, and you will soon be able to download some comics and read them on the go on your Nintendo Switch. It will have touchscreen functionality, and of course you can also use the Joy-Cons or Pro Controller to flip through pages and zoom in on individual panels. And is also usable on both TV and handheld forms. The folks at Inky Pen promise thousands of comics available at launch, including content from Valiant, IDW, Dynamite Entertainment, Le Humanoid Associé, Andrews McNeil, and many, many more. Although, because this is a somewhat indie platform, I don't imagine we will be seeing Marvel or DC as part of this Inky Pen release. However, this does pave the way for Marvel and DC specific platforms, maybe through comics or Marvel Unlimited. The best part is that this will be heading to the Nintendo eShop in November, so we can look forward to reading on the go very, very soon. Nintendo kicked off their Gamescom show with a bunch of indie releases. Some were available that very day. Some are going to be released a little later down the line and into 2019. The ones that were available that very day, there are a couple of them. One is called Bad North. It is a streamlined strategy game with a minimalist art style and light roguelike elements. The next one that was available that day is Prison Architect, the Nintendo Switch Edition, which is a port of the 2015 Management Builder, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You build a prison. It also includes the game's 2 expansions. Probably the most interesting game that was available that very day is Morphe's Law, which, if you remember, it was showed off at E3, is a shooter where you steal, I guess it's elements from the team that you're playing against. I'm going to try and explain this for you guys. So there's blue team and red team. If you shoot the other player in the arm, their arm gets smaller and your arm gets larger. Likewise for the legs. Of course, if your legs are larger than theirs, you are able to jump higher and run faster. But if you get too big, you will be unable to fit in certain elements of the map. So if that makes sense. That's why it's called Morphe's Law, because you're actually morphing your own player as well as dysmorphing the other player. Of course, how do you score this game? It's kind of similar to Splatoon in that style, where Splatoon you try and cover as much of the map with ink as possible. In Morphe's Law, you have each team has an avatar, and that avatar will grow depending on how much of the other team's size you steal. So the more you grow as a player, the more your avatar grows. And the larger your avatar grows, the higher your chance of winning. So not only is there strategy involved in being able to steal their size for, like I mentioned earlier, jumping, running, that sort of thing, but it also is how your team wins the match. If that makes any sense at all. Maybe I didn't explain that very well. But it is out now, and you play 4v4, and it looks like a boatload of fun. So if you're looking for a Splatoon-esque type shooter, one that isn't all about ink, instead about size, I would recommend picking this one up. Coming down the line, The Gardens Between, which is a puzzle game, comes out on September 20th. In October, we have a Neo Geo Classic Windjammer, which is kind of like Street Fighter meets tennis. That's coming October 23rd, and there's a newly announced sequel, Windjammers 2, to follow sometime in 2019. Monster Boy in the Cursed Kingdom, which is a spiritual successor to the Wonder Boy games. It also looks similar to last year's excellent remake of Wonder Boy Dragon's Trap. It will be out November 6th. And there is a port of a survival game, The War of Mine, which will arrive sometime in November as well. And a roguelike space shooter called Everspace will be coming sometime in December. There were a couple other games that were just announced to be before the end of the year, but with nothing firm. And those games would be Moonlighter, which is a pixel art dungeon crawler, Baba Is You, and Streets of Rogue, which is a simple looking retro brawler that will allow for 4-player multiplayer on the Switch when it finally arrives. And looking forward into 2019, there was a newly announced game called Night Call, which looks like a brooding cross between management and a visual novel, which kind of sounds cool. There is an RPG dungeon crawler, Children of Morta, coming in early 2019. And I think that is about it for all the... Oh, nope, I am mistaken. There is the wonderful game that has been out on Steam for a while, Terraria, which will be coming to the Switch later in 2019. And finally, on the Gamescom front, I think the biggest surprise of the entire conference, at least for Nintendo, was the fact that Saints Row the Third will be coming to Switch. I don't know why the third, instead of the first or second, or even the fourth, but for whatever reason, Saints Row the Third will be coming to the Nintendo Switch. The port is being handled by Deep Silver Fish Labs, and it currently has a launch window of next year. So we will have to look forward to that in the near future. That was quite the dump, Nintendo. You obviously had a lot of stuff that you were just dying to release, some stuff you were holding on to for Gamescom. It explains why maybe E3 wasn't such a big showcase. So, happy to see all these new releases and new content, and of course, Saints Row the Third, which was a very, very neat surprise. Alright, moving on. Let's get to some questions. Again, there aren't any, so why don't you guys hit me up on Twitter at tunaent_official, or find me on Patreon and ask me some questions. You can also leave them in the comments below on the YouTube video if you would like, and I would love to answer them for you. Anything Nintendo related, either personally, like my favorite games, or anything that perhaps you heard on this podcast that you would like to know more about. I would definitely like to get into those things for you guys. Just before we get to this week's game review, I have put up a few polls on my Twitter page, as I like to do. If you guys aren't following me on Twitter, please do so, and add your opinion to these polls. Regardless, just a couple results from the polls. I asked a couple different ways what you guys thought of unlockables. The results are in, and as it turns out, the vast majority of you, that is a more or less 70-30 split, do enjoy unlockables still in games. That makes me very happy to hear because I also like unlockables. I feel that it enhances the experience of the game, adds to replayability, those sorts of things. I'm happy to say that the majority of you still want unlockables. So fingers crossed for those to come back in Smash in some form or the other. Alright, we're nearing the end of the show, and you guys know what that means? It's game review time. For this week's game review, I will be reviewing the sequel to the Wii U smash hit, Splatoon 2. I am playing this game on the Switch and not including the Octo expansion. So I hope you guys enjoy. The follow-up to the breakout Wii U smash hit, Splatoon 2, builds on all the ink-splatting fun, introducing new modes and competitive gameplay, but can the big N repeat their previous success? Splatoon 2 is an online competitive shooter. That's not to say there is no offline play, because there is a story mode, but the real joy in the game is online. The main mode for Splatoon is Turf War, where you and 3 friends team up to cover as much of the battle arena with your color ink as possible. The team with more coverage wins the match. Seems simple, but it really isn't. Not only do you want to avoid being killed or splatted by the opposite team, but you also have a finite amount of ink. The only way to gain more ink is to swim in your own ink's color. This also works if you want to make a quick getaway from a skirmish. Of course, there are other game modes, but this is the main one. For me, the standout game mode is Salmon Rush. It's essentially Horde mode, but with a Splatoon twist. I don't know what it is, but fighting off wave after wave of deranged fish just feels therapeutic. The object of Salmon Rush is to collect as many golden eggs as possible, which are only dropped by the mini-boss salmon. I just wish me and my fellow subcontractors could apply for work more often. Sadly, Grisco isn't always open for business. Each match is incredibly frantic and fun, whether you're out to splat the opponent or simply ink as much territory as possible. You'll find yourself in some pretty hairy situations. Each weapon has its own special skills, and you can equip a secondary weapon like a grenade or curling rocks. Things get especially frantic in the ranked matches and of course the Splatfests. Splatfests are event matches where every player chooses a side, whether it be mayo versus ketchup or spoon versus fork, and battle it out for their side supremacy. The game is constantly being updated to keep things fresh, because no one likes stale squid. These updates aren't just cosmetic either. There is new clothing and other fashionable items added, as well as new and inventive weapons, but the developers are always tweaking with the game to make sure it's always balanced. During matches, the Inklings control very intuitively, and there is added motion controls to assist in aiming. I'm not a huge fan of motion controls, so thankfully you have the option to turn them off. Then it plays like most any other shooter. Splatoon plays like most other shooters. There is a low barrier of entry, but don't let the aesthetic fool you. The game is hard to master. On the surface, Splatoon is presented like a very kid-friendly shooter, and it is, especially compared to the hyper-realism of the Battlefields and Call of Duties out there. That doesn't mean it isn't any less competitive. Inkopolis Square is a thriving city square that serves as the game's hub world. From here you can see some of the drawings from other players as well as purchase fashionable items and new weapons. I just love how this is the way the developers decided to do this. Most games would have you earn money and buy weapons and upgrades through a series of menus, but with Splatoon there is a real sense of community and you feel like you're actually in a city square. It's fleshed out with shops, a TV studio, and even has a food truck. Each store owner is unique and eccentric in their own ways, and this includes the wacky TV hosts. Every time you boot up the game, you get to see the lovely hosts of Off the Hook, Pearl and Marina. They provide you with any news and updates that have happened, which is great if you have been playing something else for a bit and want to come back to Splatoon. You could assume that a primarily online competitive shooter wouldn't have a very interesting or robust single-player mode. Well, thankfully, you would be wrong. Splatoon 2 features a full-fledged single-player mode with a compelling story that keeps you guessing. They've even just released a full-blown expansion to this wonderful story. As a new Inkling in Inkopolis, you are quickly recruited to find out what happened to one of the other citizens. In fact, the other citizen is the loser from the final Splatfest in the original game. While searching for her, you come across an evil plot by the Octarians to steal the Zapfish that power your fair city. So quickly it's on your shoulders to not only find the missing Inkling, but also stop the Octarians. The single-player campaign is basically short levels that require you to do certain tasks and complete obstacle courses. Doing so, you learn how to control and use new weapons. The challenges are simple at first, but become difficult later on, and there are tons of hidden things to find. So the final verdict for Splatoon 2. For the gameplay, multiple game modes, and of course, those wonderful Splatfests, I gave it a 10. The controls, they're intuitive. The motion controls are kind of meh, but thankfully they're customizable and you can turn them off, so I gave it a 9. Presentation, beautiful graphics, the ink looks amazing, and I just love the wonderfully wacky characters, so I gave it a 9. Story mode, fun, challenging, complex, but still kind of lacking, so I gave it an 8, which brings the total for Splatoon to 9. Well, that's it for another episode of Nifty Ninty. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed all the Gamescom coverage as well as the usual releases and this week's latest headlines. And of course, that review of Splatoon 2, in case you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan. I actually bought it on launch day when it came out, and I played the snot out of it for a while. That is until I got Super Mario Odyssey. Then it kind of sort of fell by the wayside. However, with the Octo expansion, I think maybe I'll pick it up again. And I will do a review of the Octo expansion a little bit later down the road. I am just going to apologize again for getting this one out a little bit late. However, after this, completely back on track. Looking forward to getting back to the normal schedule of releasing these on the weekend as opposed to midweek. Anyways, thank you very much for listening, and of course, if you like what I'm doing, please leave a comment in the YouTube video below, or you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at tunaent_official. That is the number 2, NAENT_official. I would also appreciate it if you guys would subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and turn on notifications. If you have found me on iTunes, thank you very much, and please hit that subscribe button. If you are watching on one or the other and would like to go to the other, that would be greatly appreciated as well. I am doing this as a one-man show, as I'm sure a few of you have heard week after week. So I would really appreciate it if you could support me in my love of doing this for you guys, not only of video games, but of arts in general. And you can do so at Patreon. The address for that is www.patreon.com/tunaentertainment. Everything I do for you. I do it from the bottom of my heart. Love you guys. And until next week, stay nifty.